Let us see if she understands a real order. Gev honum ein af teimum dýrasta vínunum og ein rödd við allt kaviar og ferskasta hummer.
Og tin setning var gudvillig. And your final sentence not respectful.
Clause 14 remains unchanged. He will not notice before signing.
Please be careful. It is very hot.
But Everett Cole had no idea the woman he tried to humiliate was the only person who could save his empire. The language he chose to humiliate her was the very one that would save him before midnight. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows of Valmont and Rye, turning New York's evening lights into long silver ribbons on the glass. Inside, everything looked expensive enough to make ordinary people lower their voices. White tablecloths, crystal stems, polished walnut floors, a piano playing somewhere near the bar, each note careful, distant, almost too perfect. Nora Hayes moved through it all with a tray balanced on one hand and a calmness nobody bothered to notice. To most of the guests, she was part of the room. A black apron, a quiet smile, a hand refilling water before anyone asked. She had learned long ago that people revealed themselves most clearly when they believed the person beside them did not matter. At table 12, a man in a charcoal suit checked his Patek Philippe as if even time worked for him. Everett Cole had arrived 7 minutes late and still made the entire restaurant feel as if it had been waiting for him. He was not loud. Loud men needed attention. Everett simply expected it. The host had straightened. The manager had nearly bowed. 2 servers had whispered his name like a warning. Billionaire, founder of Cole Meridian Systems. The man who could buy a company on Monday, close half of it by Friday, and call it efficiency by the weekend. Across from him sat Mr. Sorenval, a gray-haired investor from the Faroe Islands with careful eyes and a folded contract beside his wine glass. Between them, on the white table, rested a deal worth more money than most people in the room would earn in their lifetimes. Nora approached with the evening's practiced grace, her order pad open, her pencil steady. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you with something to drink?" Everett did not look at her at first. He was watching Mr. Vall, smiling the smooth little smile of a man preparing a performance. Then he turned toward Nora slowly, as if she had finally earned the privilege of being seen. "Let's make this interesting," he said. His voice was soft, but the men at the table beside him still went quiet. "Since our guest has traveled so far, perhaps you can take the order properly." Nora held his gaze. "Of course, sir." Everett leaned back, lifted his glass, and began speaking in Faroese. Fast, deliberate, with the clean cruelty of someone who had rehearsed the moment before she ever walked over. The words rolled across the table like cold stones. He ordered fish, then wine, then added a sentence meant not for the menu, but for her. A sentence about pretty uniforms and empty heads. Mr. Vall's mouth tightened. The manager, standing near the service station, smiled nervously because he understood nothing except the danger in Everett's tone. A younger server looked down at the floor. Everett finished and tapped one finger against the rim of his glass. "Did you get all that?" The room held its breath. Nora glanced at her pad. She had written nothing. Not one word. For a moment, Everett's smile deepened. Then Nora lifted her eyes and answered him in clear, fluent Faroese. Not rushed. Not proud. Perfectly calm. She repeated his order exactly, corrected the vintage of the wine he had misnamed, and then added, with a politeness so quiet it made the table colder, that his final sentence was not how a respectful Faroese speaker referred to a woman doing her job. The ice in Everett's glass shifted once. A tiny crack. Mr. Vall looked at Nora as if the restaurant had suddenly changed shape around her. Everett's hand stopped halfway to his watch. For the first time that evening, the man who controlled every room he entered had no prepared expression waiting on his face. Nora closed her order pad gently, though it was still blank. "I'll have that started for you, Mr. Cole," she said. "And I'll bring the coffee after the first course, unless you prefer it cold." She turned before anyone could answer, walking back through the low golden light with the same quiet posture she had carried in. Behind her, no one laughed. No one moved. And at table 12, Everett Cole stared after the waitress he had tried to embarrass, realizing far too late that he had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. The moment Nora disappeared behind the swinging kitchen doors, Valmont and Rye began breathing again, but not the same way. Forks touched plates more carefully. Conversations returned in lower voices. At table 12, Everett Cole sat perfectly still, his expression controlled, his jaw calm, his fingers resting beside the stem of his wine glass. Only one detail betrayed him. His thumb kept brushing the edge of his watch, once, twice, then again, as if time had slipped out of order and he was trying to put it back. Mr. Sorenval watched him with a quiet amusement that held no cruelty, only recognition. "Your waitress speaks better Faroese than most consultants your firm has sent me," he said in English. Everett looked toward the kitchen doors. Apparently, the word came out clean, but thinner than usual. Patrick Doyle, the restaurant manager, hurried over with the stiff smile of a man who had just seen a candle fall near a curtain. "Mr. Cole, I hope everything is satisfactory. Nora can be reassigned if there was any confusion." Everett turned his eyes toward him. There was no confusion. Patrick swallowed. "Of course." Mr. Vall lifted his glass slightly. "If anything, she removed confusion." Everett said nothing. That was worse than anger. Patrick understood this and backed away, leaving the table with the careful steps of someone retreating from glass. In the kitchen hallway, Nora pinned the order ticket above the line and stepped aside to let a busser pass with a tray of bread plates. Her face remained composed, but her pulse had not yet settled. She had not meant to answer him that fully. She had not meant to correct him in front of the room. For 3 years, she had built a life around not being remarkable. Remarkable people were questioned. Questioned people had to explain. And Nora Hayes had spent too much of her life explaining why she had walked away from rooms where she once belonged. "What did you say to him?" whispered Maya, another server, her eyes wide. "I took his order." "Nora?" he asked in Faroese. I answered in Faroese. Maya blinked. "You speak Faroese?" Nora reached for the coffee cups stacked beside the warmer. "A little." Maya gave her a look that almost made Nora smile. That did not sound like a little. Before Nora could respond, Patrick appeared at the end of the hallway, cheeks tight, voice low. "My office. 2 minutes." The kitchen noise seemed to dip around them. Nora nodded once. No protest. No explanation. She had learned that dignity was not refusing consequences. Sometimes dignity was walking toward them without letting anyone see your hands shake. Inside Patrick's narrow office, the walls smelled faintly of printer ink and old receipts. He shut the door, lowered the blinds by 1 inch, then turned on her. "Do you have any idea who that man is?" "Yes." "Then why would you embarrass him?" Nora looked at him for a long second. "I did not embarrass him. I translated him." Patrick opened his mouth, then closed it. That was the problem with the truth. It did not always raise its voice, but it always occupied the room. "This is not a classroom," he said finally. "This is a restaurant. Guests like Mr. Cole do not come here to be corrected by staff." Nora's gaze moved briefly to the framed reservation policy behind his shoulder. Gold letters. Black frame. Rules for people who could afford not to read them. And staff do not come here to be insulted in languages guests think we cannot understand. Patrick exhaled through his nose. "You are on thin ice." "I understand." "No, I do not think you do. One complaint from that table, and your shifts are gone." Nora absorbed the words without flinching. Rent was due in 6 days. Her younger brother's community college bill sat unpaid on her kitchen counter in Queens. The old laptop she used for translation practice had begun shutting down without warning. She needed the job. She needed silence. But then she thought of Everett's smile when he spoke those words, the small pleasure he had taken in making another person feel less than human. Her voice stayed soft. "Then I hope he complains accurately." Patrick stared at her as if she had spoken another rare language entirely. Outside the office, the dinner rush continued. Plates moved. Wine poured. Rain tapped the windows with steady fingers. At table 12, Everett finally lifted the contract from beside his plate, but his eyes were not on the numbers. They were on the blank space where Nora had stood, and for the first time in years, he wondered what else he had failed to notice simply because it had been wearing an apron. When Nora returned to the dining room, she carried the first course as if nothing had happened. A slate plate of seared scallops for Mr. Vall. A small winter salad for Everett. 2 glasses of chilled white wine balanced beside her wrist with quiet precision. The room had not forgotten. She could feel it in the way the nearest tables softened their conversations when she passed. She could feel it in Maya's worried glance from across the room, in Patrick's stiff posture near the host's stand, in the way Everett Cole looked up before she reached him. He was ready this time. That was the first thing Nora noticed. His face had rearranged itself into confidence. Not the easy confidence from before, the kind that arrived before him and stayed after he left. This was tighter, measured, a man repairing a crack before anyone else could see it. "Your scallops, Mr. Vall," Nora said, setting the plate down gently. "And your salad, Mr. Cole." Everett watched her hands. They were steady. No rings. No bracelet. Only a faint ink mark near her thumb, where she had written something during service and washed it away too quickly. "How long have you spoken Faroese?" he asked. Nora adjusted the fork beside his plate by less than an inch. "Long enough to take an order." Mr. Vall smiled into his wineglass. Everett did not. That was not an answer. It was the answer appropriate to the question. A small silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable. Precise. Everett leaned back, studying her as if she had become a file he could not open. Most people would mention a skill like that on an employment application. Most applications do not ask whether a waitress can identify insults in North Germanic languages. Mr. Vall gave a quiet laugh. Everett's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Nora. "You enjoy correcting people." Nora looked at him then. Fully. Calmly. "No, sir. I enjoy accuracy." The word landed differently than he expected. Accuracy. Not pride. Not defiance. A standard. Everett had built his fortune on that word. Accurate projections. Accurate leverage. Accurate timing. Yet he had used language carelessly, like a coin tossed on a table, certain no one would check the value. Nora stepped back. "Will there be anything else before the main course?" Mr. Vall opened his mouth, but Everett spoke first. "Coffee." Nora's gaze moved to the untouched salad, then to the wine pairing. "Before dinner?" "Yes." A small test. Another one. But this time there was no smile. "Hot or cold, Mr. Cole?" For half a second, the corner of Mr. Vall's mouth lifted. Everett understood the echo. Cold coffee. Her earlier sentence had not been a joke. It had been a mirror. "Hot," he said. "Please." The final word surprised the table more than the request. Nora gave a slight nod and walked away. Everett stared down at the contract again, annoyed by the unfamiliar weight in his chest. It was not attraction. It was not anger. It was something far more inconvenient. Respect, arriving before permission. Across from him, Mr. Vall unfolded the first page of the agreement. "She is unusual," he said. Everett picked up his fork, but did not eat. "She is a server. Tonight, perhaps." Mr. Vall's voice stayed mild. "But people are rarely only what their uniform says they are." Everett looked toward the service station. Nora was pouring coffee into a white porcelain cup. Steam rose in front of her face, softening the sharp light from the chandeliers. For a moment, she looked very young. Then she turned, and the thought vanished. There was nothing fragile in her posture. She carried the coffee back through the dining room, and as she approached, Mr. Vall lowered his voice into Faroese, speaking to his assistant seated 2 chairs away. Nora was not meant to hear. Or maybe they had forgotten she could. The words were quiet, almost casual. Clause 14 remained unchanged. The English summary would keep Cole comfortable until the transfer window closed. 18 months would be enough. Nora's hand did not tremble, but the coffee in the cup shifted once, a dark circle touching white porcelain. She set it beside Everett's right hand. The steam curled between them. "Your coffee, Mr. Cole." He looked up. "Thank you." Nora held his gaze for one heartbeat too long. There it was again, that stillness. Not fear. Not hesitation. Recognition. Then she stepped away, while behind her the words from Mr. Vall's side of the table continued softly, wrapped in a language almost no one in the restaurant could understand. Almost no one. Nora reached the service station with Everett's empty salad plate still in her hand, though she could not remember picking it up. The words from table 12 followed her across the room, soft and neat and dangerous. Clause 14 remained unchanged. The English summary would keep Cole comfortable until the transfer window closed. 18 months would be enough. She set the plate down beside the dish bin, but her fingers stayed on the rim. Around her, Valmont and Rye continued its polished evening performance. Wine poured. Silverware chimed. A woman near the window laughed at something her husband said. The piano moved into a slower song, gentle enough to sound like Rain had learned music. No one knew that a few quiet words in Faroese had just shifted the shape of a billion-dollar dinner. Nora looked back at table 12. Everett was reading the agreement again, one hand near the hot coffee she had placed beside him. He looked composed, almost bored, the way powerful men looked when they believed the sharpest edges had already been negotiated away. Mr. Vall sat across from him with the relaxed patience of a fisherman who knew the tide better than the boat. Nora took one breath, then another. She could ignore it. That would be the easiest thing. She was not Everett Cole's attorney. She was not his consultant. She was not even supposed to understand the conversation. She was a waitress on a Saturday night with rent due, a brother's tuition notice on her kitchen counter, and a manager who had already told her that one complaint could end her shifts. Silence had kept her safe for years. Silence had paid the electric bill. Silence had helped her disappear. But silence had also taught men like Everett Cole to believe no one was listening. "Nora," Maya whispered, stepping close with a tray of dessert spoons. "Are you all right?" Nora blinked. "Yes. You look like you just saw something." Nora looked down at her order pad. The page was blank except for the faint pressure marks left by her pencil from the table before. Invisible writing. Words that had been there, even when nobody saw them. "Maya, where's the new receipt paper?" "Under the espresso machine." "What?" "I made a mistake on a check." Maya gave her a cautious look, but said nothing. Nora tore a clean receipt slip from the printer and placed it flat on the counter. Her pencil hovered. If she wrote too much, Patrick might see. If she wrote too little, Everett might dismiss it. She could walk to the table and say it aloud, but that would turn the warning into a public accusation, and public accusations had a way of punishing the person with the least power. So she chose the smallest possible truth. Clause 14 does not mean what your translator told you. Ask for the Faroese original before signing. She folded the receipt once. Then again. A tiny white square. Plain. Almost nothing. Her hand moved toward the coffee service. Everett's cup would need warming soon. That was reasonable. That was ordinary. She picked up the silver pot, slipped the folded receipt beneath the saucer of a fresh cup, and walked back toward table 12. Every step felt louder than it was. Patrick watched from the host's stand. Mr. Vall was speaking now in English about projected market access, his voice smooth as cream. Everett listened, pen resting between his fingers. The contract lay open beside his plate, waiting. Nora arrived at his shoulder. "Your coffee has cooled, Mr. Cole," she said. "May I replace it?" Everett glanced at the cup, then at her. Something in her face made him pause. "Go ahead." She removed the first cup and set down the fresh one. The folded receipt sat partly under the saucer, just visible enough for a man trained to notice details. Everett saw it. His eyes moved to it, then back to her. Nora did not nod. She did not signal. She only stepped back and said, "Please be careful. It is very hot." The sentence sounded ordinary. The warning did not. Everett waited until she turned away before lifting the saucer with 2 fingers. He unfolded the receipt beneath the table line. His face did not change at first. Then the pen stopped moving. Across from him, Mr. Vall continued talking, unaware that the room had tilted again. Everett read the sentence once, then twice. His thumb brushed his watch, but this time it did not look like control. It looked like a man counting the seconds before a door closed. Slowly, he looked up. Nora was across the room now, refilling water for a family of 4. She was smiling gently at a little girl who had dropped her napkin. Nothing about her seemed extraordinary. Nothing except the fact that she had just risked her job to warn a man who had tried to make her feel small. Everett placed the receipt inside the contract folder and closed it with one quiet motion. "Mr. Vall," he said, his voice calm enough to make the older man stop mid-sentence. "Before we continue, I would like to review the Faroese version of Clause 14. The table went still. Nora did not turn around. But near the window, the rain kept falling, and for the first time that night, Everett Cole listened to someone who had spoken softly. Mr. Vall's expression changed so slightly that most people would have missed it. Everett did not. The older investor lowered his glass by half an inch, and the easy warmth around his eyes cooled into calculation. "Of course," Mr. Vall said, "though I believe your legal team has already reviewed the full packet. They reviewed the English summary." Everett's voice stayed even. "I asked for the Faroese version." The assistant beside Mr. Vall shifted in his chair. A small movement. A paper napkin folded once too many times. Nora saw it from the far side of the room while placing lemon water in front of an elderly couple. She did not stare. Staring was how powerless people got caught. Instead, she watched through reflections in the window, through silver coffee pots, through the dark surface of a framed painting near the bar. Everett held out his hand for the document. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mr. Vall gave a polite smile and gestured to his assistant, who opened a slim leather folder and removed several pages printed on thick cream paper. The pages looked harmless. Clean margins. Formal language. Quiet danger always dressed well. Everett accepted them, but did not read immediately. Instead, he looked toward Nora. Not long. Not obviously. Just enough. Patrick noticed. His mouth tightened. Nora felt the room narrowing around her. She picked up a tray of empty dessert plates and carried it toward the kitchen, but Patrick stepped into her path near the service hallway. "Did you pass something to Mr. Cole?" His voice was low, sharp around the edges. Nora balanced the tray against her hip. "I replaced his coffee." "That is not what I asked." In the dining room behind him, Everett turned the first Faroese page. His eyes moved with the speed of a man used to reading contracts. But Nora knew speed would not help him here. Clause 14 was probably dressed in soft legal music, the kind that sounded reasonable until one rare phrase opened like a trapdoor. "Nora," Patrick said. "Answer me." She looked at him. "I gave a guest information he needed before signing a document." Patrick closed his eyes for 1 second, as if asking the ceiling for patience. "You involved yourself in a private business transaction. I prevented a misunderstanding. You are a waitress." "Tonight, yes." The words were quiet. They did not apologize. Patrick stared at her, and for the first time, he seemed less angry than afraid. Not afraid of her. Afraid of what she made visible. Because if Nora was more than he had assumed, then perhaps his assumptions had been the problem all along. At table 12, Everett reached clause 14. The room did not know it. The piano continued. The rain softened. A waiter laughed near the bar. But Everett Cole went still. Completely still. The phrase was there. Not in the English summary. Not in the polished version his own people had praised that morning. In the Faroese original, the transfer language did not refer to limited licensing rights. It referred to conditional operational control after an 18-month performance window. Not partnership. Not expansion. Surrender, wrapped in grammar. Everett read it again. Then a third time. Mr. Vall folded his hands. "Is there a concern?" Everett looked up slowly. "Yes." One word. Flat. Heavy. The kind of word that made nearby conversations fade without knowing why. "This clause gives your holding company operational control of our North Atlantic subsidiary if projected distribution benchmarks are not met within 18 months. Mr. Vall's smile remained, but it no longer reached anything real. "That is one interpretation. It is the correct interpretation." Everett placed the page on the table, and it was not disclosed in the English summary. The assistant looked down. Mr. Vall did not. "Language carries nuance, Mr. Cole." Everett's eyes moved once toward the service hallway, where Nora stood with Patrick, still holding the tray. "Yes," he said. "I am beginning to understand that." Patrick turned and saw everyone at table 12 looking in their direction. His face drained of color. Nora simply set the tray down on the nearest service counter. Not quickly, not nervously, gently, as if the truth deserved careful handling. Everett rose from his chair. The movement was quiet, but the room felt it. He buttoned his suit jacket, slipped the folded receipt from his contract folder, and placed it beside the Faroese pages. "We will pause negotiations until my legal team receives a certified translation from someone who does not benefit from my confusion." Mr. Vall's face remained composed, but his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. "That seems unnecessary." Everett looked at Nora again. This time, he did not hide it. "No," he said. "What was unnecessary was assuming the only person in this room who understood the truth did not matter." Nora held his gaze from across the room. She did not smile. She did not bow. She only stood there in her black apron beneath the golden lights, while the most powerful man in the restaurant finally understood that intelligence did not need permission to enter the room. The pause at table 12 did not end the evening. It changed the weight of it. Mr. Vall remained seated for another 11 minutes, speaking in the calm tone of a man trying to make a closed door look like a hallway. Everett listened without sitting back down. He did not interrupt. He did not raise his voice. He only asked for the same thing again and again with the patience of a blade wrapped in velvet. The original documents. The certified translation. The names of every attorney who had approved the summary. Each request made Mr. Vall's assistant look smaller in his chair. Each answer made the folded receipt on the table seem larger than the contract beside it. Across the dining room, Nora continued working. She refilled water. She cleared plates. She recommended the apple tart to a woman celebrating her anniversary. Her face gave nothing away. But inside, every sound had sharpened. The scrape of chair legs. The click of Everett's pen. Patrick's breath behind her when he followed her back toward the kitchen and said, "After this table leaves, you and I are going to have a serious conversation." Nora placed 2 clean forks on a tray. "I understand. You may not have a job tomorrow." She looked at the forks, lined them until their handles were even, and nodded once. "I understand that too." Patrick waited for fear. He did not get it. That unsettled him more than any argument could have. Near midnight, Mr. Vall finally stood. His smile had returned, but now it was made of glass. "We can revisit this next week, Mr. Cole. I am certain this is only a matter of interpretation." Everett picked up the Faroese pages and slid them into his folder. Interpretation is what happens when both sides are honest about the words. Mr. Vall gave a small bow to no one in particular and left with his assistant, their coats gathered too quickly by the host. The front door opened. Rain sound entered. Then they were gone. Valmont and Rye exhaled. Patrick moved first, hurrying toward Everett with a polished apology already forming on his mouth. "Mr. Cole, I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for any disruption caused by our staff tonight." Everett turned slowly. "Your staff?" Patrick glanced toward Nora. She was standing beside the service station with a coffee pot in one hand and an empty cup in the other. Nora acted outside her responsibilities. "I will address it immediately." The dining room seemed to lean closer. Everett looked at Patrick for a long moment. Then he looked at Nora. The coffee in her pot was no longer steaming. Cold again. She acted inside a responsibility most people forget, Everett said. The responsibility to tell the truth when silence would be easier. Patrick's expression faltered. "Of course, Mr. Cole, but the restaurant has procedures." "So do companies," Everett replied. "And tonight, mine almost signed away control of a division because procedure was trusted more than understanding." Nora lowered the coffee pot. Everett walked toward her. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough for the room to understand that the center of gravity had moved. When he reached her, he stopped at a respectful distance. For the first time, he did not look down at her apron, her name tag, or the order pad tucked into her pocket. He looked at her face. "Why did you help me?" he asked. The question was simple. It deserved a simple answer. Nora's fingers curled once around the handle of the pot. "Because the translation was wrong." Everett waited. Nora added, softer, "and because being unkind to someone does not make it right for them to be misled." Something moved across Everett's face then, too quiet to name. Shame, perhaps, or the beginning of it. The lights above them glowed warm on polished glasses and silver knives. Outside, taxis hissed through wet streets. Inside, the waitress he had tried to diminish stood before him without triumph. That was what unsettled him most. She had saved him and asked for nothing. No applause, no revenge, no grand moment. Only accuracy, only dignity. Everett reached into his jacket, removed a business card, then stopped. The old habit felt suddenly cheap in his hand. Cards were what he gave to people when he wanted to turn them into opportunities. Nora did not look like an opportunity. She looked like a person he had failed to see. He put the card back. "Miss Hayes," he said, carefully, as if her name deserved more attention than he had given it before. "I owe you an apology." Patrick stiffened. Maya went still near the bar. Nora's expression did not change, but her eyes held his. Everett's voice lowered, not to hide the words, but to make them honest. "I try to make you feel small because I assumed your uniform told me everything I needed to know. I was wrong." The room fell silent again. This time, not from shock, from respect. Nora gave him a small nod. "Thank you for saying that." Everett looked at the cold coffee pot in her hand and almost smiled, though the feeling hurt more than humor. "And for the record," he said, "I will never complain about cold coffee again." A faint smile touched Nora's mouth, gone almost before it arrived. But Everett saw it. And somehow, after a night of contracts, rare language, and nearly lost control. That brief smile felt like the only honest signature in the room. After midnight, Valmont and Rye no longer looked like a room built for powerful people. It looked tired, human. The white tablecloths had small creases. The candles had burned low. The last guests stepped into the wet New York night, holding coats over their heads as yellow cabs rolled past the curb. Inside, chairs were turned over onto tables one by one, and the piano sat silent near the bar, its polished lid reflecting the dimmed chandeliers. Nora moved through closing duties with the same quiet rhythm she had carried all evening. Stack the plates. Count the receipts. Wipe the marble counter until the day disappeared from it. Maya stayed close, pretending to sort silverware while watching Patrick watch Nora from his office door. Everyone knew the conversation was coming. Everyone also knew something had changed, though no one could name it without making the room uncomfortable. Everett Cole had left 15 minutes earlier, but his absence remained at table 12 like a second chair. The folded receipt was gone. The contract folder was gone. So was the easy arrogance that had entered with him. Patrick finally cleared his throat. Nora. Office. Maya's hand stopped over the silverware bin. Nora gave her a small, reassuring look and followed Patrick down the narrow hallway. The office felt smaller than before. More fluorescent. Less certain. Patrick closed the door, but did not sit. He held the schedule in one hand, the papers slightly bent at the corner. You put me in an impossible position tonight, he said. Nora stood with her hands folded in front of her apron. I know. No, you do not. Guests come here for discretion. Privacy. Control. A guest was being misled. That is not our concern. Nora looked at him then, not with anger, but with something steadier. That is exactly how people excuse everything. Patrick blinked. The words were soft, but they struck the desk between them and stayed there. He looked down at the schedule. You understand I could suspend you. Yes. You understand I probably should. Yes. He waited again for fear. Again, it did not come. Nora was afraid, but not in the way he expected. She was afraid of losing rent money, of disappointing her brother, of going home with one more closed door behind her. But she was no longer afraid of being seen. That fear had already entered the dining room, sat at table 12, and lost. Patrick rubbed his forehead. Where did you learn Faroese? Nora was quiet for a moment. Outside the office, a busser laughed softly at something Maya said. The sound made the world feel ordinary again. Graduate school, Nora said. Patrick's eyes lifted. You went to graduate school? For comparative linguistics. North Atlantic language preservation. I left before finishing. Why? Nora's gaze moved to the little office window, where the hallway light cut through the blinds in pale stripes. Because my father got sick. Because bills do not wait for dissertations. Because my brother was 17 and pretending he was not scared. Patrick's face changed, but only slightly. He had known Nora for 2 years. Or thought he had. Reliable. Quiet. Never late. Never dramatic. He had never asked what kind of mind went home after a 10-hour shift and still carried old books in a canvas tote. You should have told me, he said, weaker now. Nora almost smiled. Would it have changed my section? He did not answer. That was answer enough. In Queens, 40 minutes away by subway, there was a small apartment with a kitchen table covered in language notebooks, grocery coupons, and her brother Caleb's textbooks. There was a photograph of her father taped beside the refrigerator, his smile tired but proud, his hand resting on a stack of library books he had once brought home for her because he could not afford piano lessons or summer camps, but he could afford a library card. Learn the words, he used to say. The world hides doors inside them. Patrick placed the schedule on the desk. Go home, Nora. She waited. Am I suspended? He looked toward the hallway, then back at her. Not tonight. It was not an apology. Not yet. But it was not dismissal either. Nora nodded, untied her apron, and folded it carefully over her arm. When she stepped outside, Maya was waiting with Nora's coat. Well, Maya whispered. Nora slipped her arms into the sleeves. I still have a shift tomorrow. Maya let out the breath she had been holding. Nora smiled faintly, then walked to the front door. The rain had softened to mist. The city smelled like wet pavement and late coffee. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She looked down. A message waited on the screen. Miss Hayes, this is Everett Cole. I did not want a night to end with only an apology. There is something I need to ask you, and this time, I will ask with respect. Nora stood beneath the awning, the mist touching her face. She did not reply immediately. She simply looked at the message, then at the city beyond it. And for the first time in years, the future did not feel like a closed door. It felt like a word she had not translated yet. By the time Nora reached Queens, the city had gone quiet in the way New York only pretended to sleep. The subway car was nearly empty, its fluorescent lights humming above her, its windows reflecting a tired woman in a dark coat with a folded apron in her lap. Her phone rested in her hand, the message from Everett Cole still open. "There is something I need to ask you, and this time, I will ask with respect." She had read it 8 times between Manhattan and Jackson Heights. She had not answered, not because she was trying to be difficult, because careful people knew that every open door had a cost. When she stepped into the apartment, the radiator hissed near the window, and the kitchen smelled faintly of instant noodles and peppermint tea. Caleb was asleep on the couch with a textbook open on his chest, one sock half off, his glasses crooked against his face. He was 20 years old, taller than their father had been, but in sleep he still looked like the boy who had once waited outside hospital rooms with a vending machine dinner in his hands. Nora lifted the textbook gently and placed a blanket over him. On the kitchen table, her own notebooks were stacked beside the unpaid tuition notice. Faroese verbs, Old Norse sound shifts, legal translation samples. A life paused, not abandoned. She touched the top notebook with 2 fingers, then finally typed back. "What would you like to ask, Mr. Cole?" The reply came less than a minute later. "May I meet you tomorrow morning somewhere public? No pressure, no staff, no performance." Nora looked at the sleeping shape of her brother, then at the tuition notice under the salt shaker. She could almost hear her father's voice. "The world hides doors inside words." She answered, 9 o'clock, Elm Street Coffee, 42nd and 9th. The next morning came pale and cold, washed clean by the night rain. Nora arrived 10 minutes early and chose a small table near the window. She wore a navy sweater, plain jeans, and the same calm expression she wore with her uniform, though without the apron people seemed less certain what to do with her. Everett arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. No entourage, no driver waiting at the curb, no polished performance, just a dark overcoat, damp at the shoulders, and a paper folder held carefully in one hand. He paused when he saw her, as if reminding himself not to take control of the room. "Miss Hayes," he said, "thank you for coming." Nora nodded. "You said you had a question." Everett sat across from her, but not too comfortably. He placed the folder on the table between them like something fragile. "I spent most of last night reviewing what happened." He looked at the coffee cup in front of her. "And reviewing myself, unfortunately." Nora did not rescue him from the silence. He accepted that. "You saved my company from a serious mistake. But that is not the only reason I asked to meet." He opened the folder and turned one page toward her. At the top was an old nonprofit letterhead from the Cole Meridian Foundation. Nora knew it before she read the date. Her throat tightened by a degree so small no one else would have seen it. Everett did. "A year ago," he said, "my father's foundation received an anonymous translation of a 19th century Faroese land trust document. Our legal team had been stuck for months. That translation protected a coastal school project from being canceled." Nora looked down at the page. Her own words stared back at her, cleaned, printed, filed by people who had never known her name. Accuracy matters when people's lives depend on words. Everett tapped the note lightly, not claiming it, only acknowledging it. "You wrote this." Nora's eyes remained on the paper. "I helped a friend at the archive. It was not official. You refused payment. The school needed the money more." Everett leaned back slowly, as if the sentence had changed the size of the table. Last night, he had thought she was intelligent. This morning, he understood that intelligence was only the surface. Beneath it was discipline. Beneath discipline, sacrifice. Beneath sacrifice, a kind of kindness he had almost forgotten how to recognize. "I came here prepared to offer you a consulting contract," he said. "A generous one." Nora looked up then, and he caught the warning in her eyes before she spoke. "I am not interested in being purchased because you feel guilty." The words were not sharp. That made them sharper. Everett closed the folder. "Good. Then I will ask differently." Outside the window, people hurried past with coffee cups and scarves, unaware that a man who had built his life on commands was learning how to request. "Miss Hayes, would you be willing to review the translation independently at a professional rate you set?" with full credit under your name? Nora was quiet. The coffee between them cooled. For the first time, Everett did not interrupt the silence. He let it belong to her. Nora looked at the closed folder for a long moment, and Everett Cole finally understood that silence was not emptiness. It was a place where serious people measured the cost of their answer. Around them, Elm Street coffee filled with the soft noise of morning. A barista called out names. A cyclist in a wet jacket shook rain from his sleeves near the door. Two office workers argued gently about a presentation. Ordinary life moved in small, honest sounds, and for once Everett did not try to rise above it. Nora wrapped both hands around her cup. The coffee had cooled, but she did not drink. Full credit under my name, she said. Yes. My rate, not one your office decides for me. Yes. Direct communication with the legal team. No assistant filtering my notes until they become more comfortable for executives. Everett almost smiled, but stopped himself because she was not joking. Agreed. And if I say the translation is flawed, the deal stops until it is corrected. He held her gaze. Agreed. Nora studied him, searching for the old arrogance that had sat at table 12 the night before. She found traces of it, of course. Men like Everett did not become humble in one evening. But something had shifted. Not a transformation. A beginning. And beginnings, Nora knew, were fragile things. They needed structure. Then I will review it, she said. As a professional, Everett let out a breath, so quiet it barely moved the air. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I may tell you the whole agreement is unusable. I would rather hear an uncomfortable truth than sign a comfortable mistake. Nora looked down at her cup. That is new for you. Everett accepted it with a small nod. Probably. For the first time that morning, Nora smiled. Not fully. Not warmly enough to make the moment soft. Just enough to let him know honesty had been heard. Everett slid the folder toward her, then reached into his coat pocket and removed an envelope. Nora's expression cooled immediately. He placed it flat on the table, but did not push it forward. This is not a tip, he said carefully. It is an advance payment for the first review, based on the rate used by senior legal language consultants in New York. If the amount is wrong, correct it. Nora opened the envelope only far enough to see the figure. It was more than she had expected. Less than a bribe. Exactly professional. That detail mattered. Everett had listened. I will send an invoice, she said, closing it again. Of course. She placed the envelope inside her tote bag, next to the old notebook with the cracked blue cover. Everett noticed the notebook, its edges worn soft from years of use. May I ask you something personal? Nora raised one eyebrow. You may ask. I may not answer. Why did you leave graduate school? She could have given the short answer. Money. Illness. Timing. The three words that had folded her life into smaller rooms. Instead, she looked out the window where sunlight was beginning to touch the wet sidewalk. My father used to bring home library books every Friday. Languages, maps, old histories. He said words were doors, and if I learned enough of them, nobody could lock me out of the world. Her voice stayed steady. Then he got sick. Doors became bills. I chose my brother. I would choose him again. Everett said nothing. There was nothing useful a rich man could say quickly to a sentence like that. Nora appreciated that he did not try. Later that afternoon, when she arrived at Valmont and Rye for her shift, the restaurant felt different before anyone spoke. Maya hugged her near the lockers. Patrick avoided her eyes for the first hour, then handed her a revised schedule with better shifts and said, "We should talk about your future here," in a voice that sounded almost like an apology learning to stand. Nora took the paper, nodded, and went to work. At 7:15, a courier arrived with a sealed copy of the Faroese contract and a formal letter addressed to Eleanor Hayes, independent translation consultant. Maya read the envelope over Nora's shoulder and nearly dropped a tray of spoons. Nora did not laugh, but her eyes warmed. At table 12, no one sat for most of the night. The candle remained unlit. The chair Everett had used stayed pushed in, quiet as a lesson. And near closing, as Nora wiped the marble counter beneath the soft gold lights, she saw her reflection in the glass. No longer invisible. No longer hiding completely. Still wearing the apron. Still carrying the order pad. But something had changed in the way she stood. The world had not opened all at once. It rarely did. But one door had moved. One word had turned. One man had learned that power without respect could miss the truth standing 3 feet away. Nora folded the day's final receipt and placed it beside the register. Outside, New York shimmered after the rain. Inside, the coffee had gone cold again. And this time, nobody mistook silence for emptiness.